The candles were still burning. That was the first thing Riker noticed. 12 white pillars lined down the center of the dining table, flames steady, unhurried, casting gold across 2 empty plates. The city stretched 40 floors below, New Avalon's skyline bleeding neon into the night sky like a wound that never closed. The penthouse smelled like rosemary and warm bread. Dinner was ready. Kalin was not there. Riker Beaumont Zane stood at the entrance of the dining room, still in his overcoat, still carrying the weight of a 3-hour negotiation that had nearly ended in bloodshed. His jaw was tight. His eyes swept the table once, twice, the way a man checks a room for threats, and landed on the empty chair across from his. 7 years. 7 years, that chair had never been empty at this hour. He set his briefcase down slowly. Kalin. His voice moved through the penthouse and came back alone. No answer. That part wasn't unusual. Kalin couldn't speak. But there was always something. The soft press of a hand on his arm, a folded note propped against his glass, the quiet sound of movement from the kitchen or the hall. Tonight, nothing moved. Riker walked to the kitchen. Empty. The bedroom. Empty. He came back to the dining table and stood there, looking at the plate set perfectly across from his. Crystal glass. Linen napkin folded into a sharp point. Everything Kalin always did, every single night without being asked, without being thanked if Riker was being honest. His phone buzzed. He ignored it. Something on the table caught his eye. Kalin's phone, the one Riker had bought him, sitting face down beside the flower arrangement. A pale yellow orchid, freshly placed, still dewy. Kalin never left without his phone. Riker picked it up. The screen was dark. He set it back down carefully, like it might break, like it meant something he wasn't ready to name yet. Hi viewers. Have you ever had someone in your life who showed up for you every single day, so consistently that you stopped seeing them, until the day they didn't show up anymore? Then he saw it, at the head of the table, between the candle holders, a single folded piece of paper, cream-colored, edges pressed flat with intention. His name was written on the front in Kalin's handwriting. Neat, small, deliberate. Riker stared at it. He did not open it. Not yet, because some part of him, the part that had survived 38 years, 3 wars inside his own organization, and more betrayals than he could count, already understood that whatever was written inside that letter was going to rearrange something permanent. He pulled out the chair. His chair, sat down slowly, and looked at the empty seat across from him in the candlelight. The city kept glowing outside, indifferent, alive. The food on both plates had gone warm, then cool, then cold. Riker didn't move. He just sat there, the letter untouched in front of him, the silence pressing in from every corner of the room. He could not explain why his chest felt the way it did. He could not explain why the empty chair felt louder than anything that had happened tonight. He reached for the letter, stopped, pulled his hand back. His phone buzzed again. His head of security. Probably another emergency. Probably something that needed him 5 minutes ago. He didn't pick up. For the first time in 7 years, Riker Beaumont Zane let the phone ring out, and sat with the quiet his life had apparently been full of all along, without him ever once noticing. The orchid on that table had been Kalin's idea. Everything in the penthouse had been Kalin's idea. The warm lighting instead of the harsh overhead panels Riker originally installed. The reading chair by the east window. The small framed photo of the city at dawn. The only soft thing on a floor full of sharp edges and dark furniture. Kalin had moved through Riker's world the way water moves through stone. Quietly, consistently, until the stone didn't remember what it felt like before. 3 years ago, Kalin Rowe had started volunteering at a shelter on the south side of New Avalon called The Root. He never told Riker directly. He left a note one evening. A habit, since speaking wasn't something his body allowed. His voice had been taken from him at 17, during the worst months of his life, and it never came back. Doctors called it conversion disorder. Kalin just called it the silence he learned to live inside. The note read, "Going out Tuesday evenings. Back by 9. Don't worry." Riker had read it, nodded once, and forgotten about it by the time he got to his desk. That was 3 years ago. What Riker didn't know, what he had never thought to ask, was that the root had become the center of Kalin's life outside these walls. 3 nights a week, sometimes 4. He helped with meals. He sat with kids who had nowhere to go. He read to them using a tablet that turned his written words into sound, a workaround that took him months to get comfortable with, and then became second nature. And then there was Nico, 6 years old, small for his age, brown eyes that missed nothing. He had arrived at the root 8 months ago with a busted lip and no last name he was willing to share. He didn't talk much either, so from the very first evening, he attached himself to Kalin like a shadow. They communicated through a language they invented on their own. Taps on the wrist for yes, 2 taps for no. A squeeze on the shoulder meant "I'm here. You're okay." Nico called him Papa once, by accident, during a thunderstorm when the lights went out and he grabbed Kalin's sleeve in the dark. He looked terrified afterward, like he'd broken a rule. Kalin had pulled him close instead, typed one word on his tablet and turned the screen toward the boy. "Stay." Nico had exhaled like he'd been holding that breath his whole life. What Riker also didn't know was that Kalin had been noticing things that didn't add up. Staff members at the root who disappeared from the schedule without explanation. Delivery vans that came after hours. Financial records Kalin happened to see when he stayed late to help with filing. Gaps where there shouldn't have been gaps. Numbers that walked in the front door and didn't walk back out. He didn't know what it meant yet, but he was paying attention, because Kalin Rowe had spent years learning how to read rooms other people didn't bother looking at. Back at the penthouse, dinner was always ready by 8. Every night. Even when Riker didn't come home until 11. Even when he didn't come home at all. Even when he forgot to send a message saying he'd be late, which happened more than either of them acknowledged. Kalin would sit at that table. Wait. Clear the plates when the food went cold. Leave something covered in the kitchen in case Riker came in hungry at midnight. And go to bed without saying anything about it. Because that was what love looked like to Kalin. Steady, present, unremarked upon. He didn't need a parade. He just needed to be seen. Then one Tuesday evening, Nico tugged Kalin's sleeve during dinner cleanup at the root. His small face was serious the way children's faces get when they're carrying something too heavy for them. He signed, their private language, pointing 2 fingers toward his own eyes, then outward. "I saw something." Kalin turned to face him fully. Nico's hands were shaking. He pointed toward the back loading dock. Then he pressed both palms flat over his mouth. The gesture Kalin recognized immediately. "I wasn't supposed to see it." Kalin went very still. He typed fast on his tablet, turned the screen to the boy. "What did you see?" Nico looked at him for a long moment, then looked at the door, then back. And before he could answer, the lights inside the root went out. The lights came back on 40 seconds later. Kalin counted. When they did, Nico was gone. Not gone like a child who wandered to another room. Gone like someone had made a decision about him. Kalin moved through the root fast, checking the kitchen, the back hall, the bathroom, the small TV room where kids watched movies on Friday nights. He pushed through the rear exit door, the one that faced the loading dock, and stepped out into cold air and orange-tinted dark. The dock was empty. No van, no men, nothing moving. Just Kalin, breathing hard in the November air, with a feeling in his stomach that had no name but was absolutely not nothing. He pulled out his phone, opened his message thread with Riker. Something happened at the shelter. A child I know may be in danger. I need you to call me, please. He stared at the screen. Sent it. Then he went back inside and started writing down everything he remembered. The partial plate number on the van he'd seen 3 weeks ago. The name of the staff member who stopped showing up. The number discrepancy in the supply records he'd seen by accident, then seen again on purpose. He wrote it all out, clear and careful, in the notes app he used for situations that needed precision. Then he emailed it to Riker. Then he sent a follow-up text summarizing the most urgent parts. He did not hear back that night. What Kalin did not know, what he had no way of knowing, was that Saurin had standing access to Riker's personal assistant, his secondary email, and the internal communications platform the organization used for flagged messages. Saurin had built that access quietly over 2 years under the justification of operational efficiency. Saurin was 34, precise, and deeply patient. He had worked his way into Riker's inner circle through results. He delivered outcomes, he predicted problems, he made himself indispensable. Riker trusted him the way powerful men trust systems that work, without questioning the maintenance. Saurin had never liked Kalin. Not because of who Kalin was, because of what Kalin represented. An Omega who lived inside the most fortified emotional distance Riker had ever built, and had somehow gotten through it anyway. An Omega who noticed things, who remembered things, who, if Riker ever actually listened, would start asking questions that could unravel everything. Saurin had been intercepting Kalin's messages for 11 months. Not all of them, just the ones that mattered. The ones about unusual activity, about financial discrepancies, about staff members who had connections to specific distribution networks on the south side of New Avalon. He replaced those messages with edited versions. Shorter, softer, stripped of detail. The kind of messages that read like an anxious partner overreacting to nothing. And then he would get to Riker first. He sent another message about the shelter thing. Riker. Mid-meeting. Distracted. Is it urgent? He's concerned about a child going missing. I've already contacted the shelter director. It's handled. Okay. That was usually how it went. Riker trusted the summary. He didn't check the source. Meanwhile, Kalin was at the route every night that week, working with the shelter director to report Nico's disappearance to the city's child services network. He filed paperwork. He gave statements. He described Nico's physical appearance from memory with a precision that made the intake officer look up from her form. He was trying everything he could reach. He just couldn't reach Riker. 2 weeks after Nico disappeared, Kalin put together everything he had into a single document. He printed it. Photographs of the loading dock taken from the window. A list of names cross-referenced with the financial records. A timeline of events. He came home that night and set the folder on Riker's desk. The next morning, the folder was gone. He assumed Riker had it. He didn't know Saurin had arrived early. 3 days later, Riker called Kalin into his office, the first real conversation they'd had in almost a month. His face was unreadable, which was not unusual, but something in his eyes was different, closed in a way they'd never been before. He set a printed document on the desk between them. Kalin looked down. It was a communication log. Messages, flagged and time-stamped. His name was on them. The recipient was an encrypted contact ID Kalin didn't recognize. His stomach dropped. He looked up at Riker. Riker didn't say anything for a long moment. I need you to explain this. Kalin reached for the paper. Riker let him take it. He read it once, twice, turning the page over, looking for context that wasn't there. These weren't his messages. The format was right. The timestamp was right. His display name was there. But the words weren't his. He looked at Riker. He shook his head, hard, clear, deliberate. He pulled out his phone, typed fast. "This isn't mine. I didn't send this. Someone made this." Riker looked at the phone screen. He didn't call Kalin a liar. He didn't raise his voice. He did something that landed heavier than either of those things. He nodded slowly, said, "Okay," and looked away, like he'd already made up his mind before Kalin walked through the door. The look on Riker's face stayed with Kalin all night. Not anger, not accusation, distance. The specific kind that happens when someone decides, quietly, without announcement, that they believe something else now. Something that doesn't include you. Kalin sat on the edge of the bed in the dark and processed it the way he processed everything. Slowly, completely, letting each piece settle into place until he understood exactly what he was looking at. Riker doubted him. After 7 years. After everything. Riker had looked at fabricated evidence and chosen it over the man sitting 3 feet in front of him. He didn't cry. He sat very still, the way a person sits when the ground under them has shifted and they're recalculating whether it'll hold. He opened his notes app. He started documenting time, location, what Riker said, what the paper claimed, what questions weren't asked. He didn't know what he would do with it yet. He just knew he needed it to exist somewhere outside his own head. Then he went to the dining room, set the table, waited. Riker didn't come to dinner that night. The food went cold at 9:30. 10 Kalin cleared the plates. He didn't leave a note. He went to bed. The next night he set the table again. Because that was what he did. That was who he was. Riker came home at 11:15. Walked past the dining room. The light was on, the candles burned low, 1 plate on the table. Kalin heard his footsteps pause in the hallway, then continue toward the office. The office door closed. Kalin sat at the table until the candles burned out on their own. He did not go knock on the office door. He did not send a message. He went to bed again. This continued for 11 days. On the 12th day, Kalin stopped setting Riker's place at the table. He set 1 plate, 1 glass, 1 set of utensils. He ate alone. And for the first time in 7 years, the dining room felt exactly the right size for 1 person. Meanwhile, inside Riker's organization, Saurin was moving fast. He had 2 objectives. The first was eliminating the financial trail before Riker's quarterly audit caught it. The second was managing Kalin. Specifically, making sure Kalin's credibility continued to erode before he found a way around Saurin's interference. But Saurin had miscalculated something. He assumed Kalin's silence meant passivity. Didn't. Kalin had spent 2 weeks quietly, carefully, compiling a second file. This one was different from the first. More precise. He had cross-referenced the names he knew against public-facing business registrations. He had documented 3 separate incidents at the root that connected to the same recurring contact ID appearing in the organization's lower-level communications. Information he had access to through a shared drive Riker had given him years ago for household administrative purposes and had never thought to revoke. He wasn't a trained investigator, but he was extraordinarily good at noticing what other people considered invisible. On a Thursday evening, he packaged everything: digital copies, printed copies, a clear written summary in language that required no interpretation, and emailed it to the 1 person inside Riker's organization he believed Saurin hadn't reached yet. Marcus Webb, Riker's head of internal security. Old guard. 16 years with the organization. A man who had once told Kalin, during a quiet moment at a company event, "You pay more attention than anyone in this building, including the Alpha." Kalin hit send. Then he came home, set 1 plate on the table, ate his dinner, cleaned up, and sat by the window with the city below him, wondering if anyone was going to hear him this time. That night, Riker passed the dining room again. He stopped in the doorway, looked at the single plate, the single glass. He stood there for a moment that stretched longer than it should have. Then he walked to his office. The door didn't close all the way this time, but it didn't open either. The morning Kalin left, the city was still dark. 4:53 a.m. The hour when New Avalon wasn't performing for anyone yet. No traffic noise from 40 floors below. No light shifting through the floor-to-ceiling glass except the faint, flat gray of pre-dawn pressing in from the east. He had already been awake for 2 hours. He did not pack a suitcase. He took a bag, the kind used for gym trips, casual and unsuspicious, and moved through the penthouse with a quietness so practiced it had no effort in it. A few changes of clothes, his tablet, the charger, his notes, both printed and backed up 3 separate ways. His phone. He left Riker's phone on the kitchen counter. He stood in the hallway outside the bedroom door for 11 seconds. He counted them. Then he walked to the dining room. The table was set one place the way it had been for 2 weeks. He'd set it the night before out of habit, then stood there looking at it, realizing the habit no longer had a reason. He picked up the plate, put it away in the cabinet, removed the placemat, laid the single folded letter on the table where the plate had been, in the center, where Riker's eyes would land when he walked in and found the room empty. He did not read it again. He already knew what it said. He went to the elevator, pressed the lobby button. He did not cry. He had already done that 3 weeks ago in the bathroom with the water running, the way people cry when they've decided that no one else gets to see it. By 5:15, he was in a cab heading south. By 6, he was standing outside a building 4 blocks from the route. A walk-up apartment, 3rd floor, 2 rooms. He had arranged it 10 days ago through a housing assistance contact he'd met during his shelter work. Paid the first month from a personal account Riker didn't manage. Kalin had been planning this with the same quiet precision he brought to everything. The apartment smelled like fresh paint and someone else's old coffee. He set his bag on the floor, stood in the center of the empty room. Outside, New Avalon was starting its morning. Bus engines, a vendor rolling out a cart, someone's window cracking open 2 floors up. The city assembling itself, indifferent and alive, the way it always did regardless of what any one person was going through. Kalin pulled out his tablet, opened a new note, typed, Day 1. Then he closed it, sat down on the bare floor with his back against the wall, and let himself be still for the first time in weeks. Back at the penthouse, Riker's alarm went off at 7. He silenced it, lay there for a moment, ceiling above him, the particular quiet of the room registering as normal before his brain fully engaged. Then he got up, walked to the kitchen, noticed his phone on the counter, frowned, checked the bedroom, Kalin's side of the closet, the bathroom, the reading chair by the window. He walked to the dining room, table bare, no plate, no candle, no orchid. The letter sat exactly where Kalin had placed it, in the center of the empty table with Riker's name on the front. Riker stood at the entrance of the room. For a long time he didn't move. Something inside his chest, some mechanism he'd spent decades reinforcing, made a sound it had never made before. Not a crack, not a break, more like a key turning in a lock he hadn't known was there. He walked to the table, picked up the letter, held it, and then, for the second time in 3 days, Marcus Webb called. This time, Riker answered. Marcus's voice was steady, controlled, and completely without warmth. We have a problem with Saurin. I need you in the office in the next hour. And Riker, you're going to want to read everything before you walk in. Riker looked at the letter in his hand, then at the empty table, then at the city outside, glittering and indifferent in the morning light. "I'll be there." He put the phone in his pocket. He did not put the letter down. He carried it with him. Marcus Webb did not waste words. That was the first thing Riker had always respected about him. So when Marcus walked into the conference room that morning, set a hard drive on the table and said, "Saurin has been running a parallel operation inside your organization for 2 years." Riker didn't interrupt. He just listened, and the room got very quiet. The hard drive contained 14 months of compiled evidence. Financial transfers routed through shell entities registered in 4 different states. Falsified vendor contracts. Payroll ghosts. Names on the books. No corresponding employees. Money flowing out every 2 weeks into accounts that fed a distribution network operating out of New Avalon's South Corridor. The same South Corridor where the Root sat. Where children had been going missing. Where Kalin had been trying to tell him something for months. Riker's jaw tightened. He did not move. Marcus kept going. "There's more." He pulled up a communication log on the room screen. Flagged messages. Timestamps. Display names. Riker recognized the format. It was the same format as the document Saurin had presented to him 3 weeks ago. The one with Kalin's name on it. Except these weren't Kalin's messages being sent to enemies. These were Kalin's real messages, the ones he had actually sent. Sitting in an interception folder Saurin had built inside the organization's internal system. Edited. Replaced. Filed away where Riker would never look unless he knew to look. Riker stared at the screen. There were 43 of them. 43 messages from Kalin, spanning 11 months. Warnings, evidence, specific names, dates, reference numbers, detailed enough that Marcus, when he finally received the direct copy Kalin had sent him 12 days ago, had been able to build an entire case around it in less than a week. 12 days ago. Riker thought about 12 days ago. He had been in this building, running meetings, signing off on contracts, sitting at his desk while Kalin sat in an apartment 4 blocks from a shelter, rebuilding a life without him, and Marcus was quietly dismantling Saurin's entire operation using the evidence Kalin had assembled alone. "He sent this to you directly," Riker said. "Not a question." 10 days before he left the penthouse, Marcus confirmed. "He couldn't get it to you, so he found the next best option." Riker looked at the screen for a long moment. 43 messages. 11 months. And not once had Riker asked why Kalin seemed quieter than usual. Why the notes on his desk stopped mentioning the shelter. Why the man who noticed everything had stopped bringing things up. He'd assumed the silence meant there was nothing to say. That was his mistake. Not the biggest one, but close. "Where's Saurin now?" Riker said. "Building. 3rd floor. He thinks this morning is a budget review." Riker stood up. He picked up the hard drive. He said, "Pull everyone into the main boardroom. Every executive. Every department head. Every investor who has a seat at this table." Marcus didn't ask why. He already knew. "And Marcus." Riker paused at the door. "Find out where Nico is." The silence that followed that sentence was the loudest thing in the room. Nico was found on a Thursday. Not in the city. 40 minutes north, in a state-licensed group facility that had received an anonymous placement request 8 weeks earlier. The intake paperwork listed the child as a ward with no identified family. No prior shelter record. No emergency contact. Whoever placed him there had made him disappear on paper. They had not counted on Marcus Webb, or on the fact that Kalin had given Marcus a photograph of Nico, a physical description, and a handwritten note that read, "He has a scar on his left wrist from a fall at the shelter. He taps twice when he agrees with something. He will not speak to you at first. Give him time. The facility worker called it the most detailed child identification request she had ever received from a non-family contact. Nico was brought into a private meeting room. He sat across from a social worker and Marcus's associate and said nothing for 4 minutes. Then the associate placed Kalin's photograph on the table. Nico looked at it, reached out, pressed 2 fingers down on the photo. Twice. The associate called Marcus immediately. Marcus called Riker. He's safe. And he's talking. What Nico said, haltingly, in pieces over 2 separate conversations with a trauma-trained counselor, confirmed everything. He had been at the loading dock the night the lights went out at the route. He had seen 2 men move 3 other children into a van. He had recognized one of the men, not by name but by face, as someone he had seen talking to a man in a black car outside the shelter weeks earlier. The counselor showed him a photograph array. He pointed to a face without hesitating. It was Saurin Cade's field coordinator, the same coordinator whose name appeared on 3 of the falsified vendor contracts. The thread pulled, and everything attached to it came with it. Over the next 72 hours, Riker's internal investigation team, working alongside Marcus and 2 outside forensic accountants, traced the full scope of what Saurin had built. It wasn't just financial fraud. That was the surface. Underneath, a referral pipeline. Children from at-risk shelters, identified by a contact inside those organizations, quietly redirected before proper documentation could catch up. Placed in facilities where oversight was minimal and records were inconsistent. The route had been a target for 14 months. Kalin had started noticing irregularities at month 3. That matters. He had been ahead of it the entire time. And Riker had been the last person in his own organization to understand what was happening. Because the man closest to him had been making sure of it. Riker went back and read every one of the 43 intercepted messages. Not summaries, the full text. He read them in order from the first, a careful, measured note about financial records that didn't add up, to the last, which was shorter than all the others. The last one was dated the night Nico disappeared. It read, "I don't know where else to send this. I don't know who else is left to tell. Nico is gone and I am scared and I need you to hear me this one time. Please." Riker read it twice. Then he set his phone face down on the desk, pressed both hands flat on the surface, and stayed like that for a while. The boardroom filled fast. 11 executives, 4 department heads, 3 outside investors who had been in New Avalon for a scheduled quarterly review and now found themselves sitting in a room where the air felt like something was about to detonate. Saurin arrived last. He walked in with the particular ease of someone who believed the meeting was routine. He set his portfolio on the table, nodded at 2 of the executives, took his usual seat, 3rd from Riker's right, close enough to be considered inner circle, positioned with enough space to seem objective. He did not look concerned. That was telling. Riker was already standing at the head of the table when Saurin sat down. He didn't open with pleasantries. He said, "We're going to talk about the South Corridor Distribution Network." Saurin's expression didn't change. That was also telling. Riker set the hard drive in the center of the table. Marcus, standing at the room's main display panel, pulled up the first document. Financial records, shell entities, dates, amounts. Every transaction Saurin had routed through the organization's accounts over 26 months. Then the communication logs. Then the vendor contracts. Then the child placement records. Then Nico's testimony, not in full, protected appropriately, but the key detail. The photograph array. The identification. The boardroom went from tense to airless. One of the outside investors stood up partway through and quietly left the room. 2 of the executives exchanged a look that lasted less than a second. The department heads sat very still. Saurin's composure lasted longer than Riker expected. He waited until the fourth document before he spoke. These records have been selectively framed. The forensic accountants worked backward from the shell entities, Marcus said, steady, unhurried. The fund trails don't leave gaps. There's nothing selective about it. Saurin shifted, just slightly. Any communication logs presented here would need independent verification before. They were verified, Riker said. 3 days ago. Silence. Saurin looked at Riker directly for the first time since sitting down. Riker looked back. He didn't raise his voice. He never raised his voice in rooms like this. That was a move for people who needed volume to compensate for what they lacked in certainty. Riker was very certain. You intercepted 43 communications from my household over 11 months. You fabricated evidence to discredit a source who had already identified your operation. You arranged the removal of a 6-year-old child who witnessed your people at work. He paused. And you did all of it while sitting in this building, in my organization, in a chair I gave you. The room did not breathe. Saurin's face changed then. Not into fear exactly, into something colder. The expression of someone calculating whether there was still an exit. There wasn't. Security came in at Marcus's signal. Saurin stood. He looked at Riker one last time and said, quietly, without theater, "You were easy to manage." Riker let that land. Didn't flinch. "Yeah," he said. "I was." The door closed behind Saurin. The room stayed quiet for a beat longer than was comfortable. Then Riker looked at the remaining executives and said, "We're going to do a full structural audit. Every position Saurin touched, every approval he signed, every access he had." He looked at Marcus. "Start this afternoon." He picked up the hard drive. He walked out. In the elevator, alone, going down to the parking level, he reached into his jacket pocket. The letter was still there. He hadn't opened it. He still didn't, but his hand stayed on it the entire ride down. Kalin's apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building that smelled like old wood and dish soap and the particular warmth of a place where people actually lived. Riker stood outside it for 6 minutes before he knocked. He knew because he checked his watch twice. The door opened. Kalin stood in a gray pullover and work pants, tablet tucked under one arm, hair loose instead of the way he'd always worn it at the penthouse. He looked at Riker the way you look at weather, assessing, neutral, not afraid. He did not step back to let him in. He did not close the door either. He just waited. Riker had rehearsed something on the drive over. A version of what he needed to say that was organized and measured and covered the essential points in the right order. He forgot all of it the moment he saw Kalin's face. "I read the messages," he said. Kalin didn't react. "All of them, in order. I know what you sent me and what I never received, and I know." He stopped. Started again. "Saurin is gone. Nico is safe. He's been placed with a certified foster family 2 miles from the route, and the social worker says he asks about you every day." Something moved in Kalin's eyes. Not forgiveness. Not relief. Something quieter. The specific reaction of someone receiving news they had already hoped for but hadn't let themselves count on. He reached out and tapped the door frame once. A gesture Riker didn't know the meaning of. Then he stepped back and let him in. The apartment was small. Nothing like the penthouse. 2 rooms, minimal furniture, 1 bookshelf already full. Drawings taped to the refrigerator that Riker recognized immediately as children's artwork from the shelter. A pillow on the couch that had clearly been slept on recently. A life. A whole, fully functioning life. Built in the time it took Riker to understand what he'd been missing. They sat at the small kitchen table. Kalin set his tablet between them, which was how he always managed conversations that needed precision. Riker reached into his jacket, set the letter on the table between them. Still sealed, still folded exactly as Kalin had left it. Kalin looked at it, looked at Riker. Riker said, "I didn't open it. I've been carrying it for 3 weeks and I didn't open it." Kalin's expression shifted, the smallest movement at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, something more complicated. He picked up his tablet, typed, turned it to face Riker. "Why not?" Riker thought about that. "Because I kept feeling like I didn't deserve to know what it said until I understood what I'd done. And I didn't understand yet." Kalin studied him, typed again. "Do you understand now?" Riker looked at the letter. "You waited for me every night for 7 years. You tried to warn me for almost a year. You protected a child, put together evidence that took down a 2-year operation, and found a way to get it to the one person in my organization who would actually use it, all while I was sitting in my own building, 50 feet from your messages, choosing not to look." He paused. "I didn't fail you because of Saurin. Saurin worked because I had already stopped paying attention. He just walked through a door I had left open." The apartment was very quiet. Outside, a kid somewhere on the block was laughing at something. Loud, unself-conscious, the kind of laughter that doesn't know it's being heard. Kalin looked at his hands for a moment. Then he typed, turned the tablet around slowly. "Why did it take losing me to finally see me?" Riker had no good answer for that. He had an honest one. "I don't know. I think I believed that being there, in the same building, same bed, same life, was the same as being present. And I was wrong about that for a long time." Kalin read the words, did not respond immediately. He stood up, went to the kitchen, came back with 2 cups of tea, set one in front of Riker, sat back down. It wasn't forgiveness. Both of them knew that. But it wasn't a closed door either. Kalin typed one more time, turned the screen. "I'm not ready to come back. But I'm not done talking to you. Those are different things." Riker picked up the tea. "Okay," he said. And for the first time in months, he meant it without reservation. 3 months later, the community center 2 blocks from the route opened its 2nd floor. New Avalon City had co-funded it, partly because of the advocacy work Kalin had been doing through the shelter network, partly because of a private donation that arrived anonymously but that everyone who knew Riker Beaumont Zane recognized immediately. He didn't put his name on it. Kalin noticed. He didn't say anything about it. He just kept working. The 2nd floor had 4 classrooms, a counseling suite, and a room Nico had personally helped paint. A fact Nico told everyone who visited, including strangers, within approximately 90 seconds of meeting them. Nico was doing better, still quiet in new situations, still watchful, but he laughed more. He had started a habit of saving interesting rocks in his jacket pockets and presenting them to people he decided he trusted. He gave Kalin a particularly smooth gray one the week the 2nd floor opened. He gave Riker a small white one with a streak of rust through the center. He did not explain his reasoning. He didn't need to. The evening of the opening, after the last of the guests had filtered out and the center staff were wrapping up tables and folding chairs, Riker stood outside on the sidewalk. The building hummed with activity behind him. Through the wide front window, he could see Kalin moving through the main room, speaking to one of the program coordinators, or rather, signing and typing in the fluid back and forth he had developed with the people here. Someone said something that made him laugh. It was quiet from where Riker stood, but he could see it. The laugh, the ease of it, the way Kalin occupied that room like someone who knew exactly where they belonged. Riker had been inside earlier. Kalin had introduced him to the staff, calmly and without ceremony. No explanation of their history, just, "This is Riker." He's been helping with the building fund. The kind of introduction that said exactly as much as it needed to and nothing more. Riker had shaken hands and stayed out of the way. That was new for him. Staying out of the way. He was still learning it. He had been doing a lot of learning in the past 3 months. Most of it uncomfortable. The kind that required sitting with things he couldn't fix by making a decision or signing a check. The kind that had no resolution date and no clear deliverable. The kind that just asked him to keep showing up. Differently than before. Without the assumption that showing up was automatically enough. He thought about the dinner table. The empty chair. He thought about how long it must have sat empty on Kalin's side before Kalin stopped seeing the point of filling it. How many nights he had come home to a penthouse full of warmth. He didn't make and quiet love. He didn't earn and told himself that was just how things were. How many times Kalin had cleared a cold plate and said nothing. Not because he had nothing to say. Because he had learned that saying it didn't change anything. That was the part that stayed with Riker. Not the 43 intercepted messages. Not Saurin's operation. Not even the empty chair. The fact that Kalin had learned to stop expecting to be heard, and had never once made Riker feel guilty about that. Just kept showing up. Kept waiting. Kept loving quietly. In a penthouse where that love moved through every room except the one Riker was actually in. The front door of the center opened. Nico came out first, jacket on, backpack over both shoulders, one hand gripping the strap the way small children do when they're tired but won't admit it. He looked at Riker, considered him for a moment the way he considered most things, then walked past and sat down on the front step. Kalin came out a few seconds later. He stopped when he saw Riker. They looked at each other in the amber glow of the streetlight. Neither spoke. Neither signed. The city moved around them. A bus passing. Someone's music from an open window 2 floors up. The particular sound of New Avalon at night. Full of life, it didn't slow down for anyone. Then Nico looked up at Kalin from the step. His voice was small. Thoughtful. The kind of question that arrives when a child has been turning it over in their mind for a while and finally decides the moment is right. If Alpha Riker changes, he said. He paused. Looked between them. Do you think you'll ever come home? The streetlight hummed. The city kept moving. Kalin looked at Nico, then at Riker. The answer was somewhere in his face. But the story ended before it arrived. Some answers take longer than one evening to earn. Some doors have to be stood in front of quietly without guarantees until the person on the other side decides what they believe. That's not weakness. That's what it costs to love someone well. And this time Riker was willing to pay it. Love doesn't end in a single moment. It's rebuilt in small ones. A cup of tea, a white rock, a door left open instead of closed. If the story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you believe in second chances, not easy ones, but earned ones, drop a comment below. Your words might be exactly what someone reading this needed. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Every story on this channel is built for the person who needs to feel seen. Don't miss what's coming next.